Okay, now that you can hear me, I would like to welcome everyone to my presentation this afternoon. My name is Jessica Freiherr. As you can see up here on the slide, I'm a professor at the Erlangen University for Neuroscience of Sensory Perception. And I also work for the Fraunhofer Institute, Fraunhofer IVV in Freising. And I would like to introduce you to the applied part of my research and talk about psychophysiological effects of scented ingredients. Just very briefly, I would like to introduce you to the background of Fraunhofer Institute. We have 5 fields of business that you can see up here on the slide. And don't be surprised, it's a Fraunhofer Institute which mainly works with the food industry. So we are tasked with developing food and food-related products, optimizing processing machinery, and dealing with hygiene in production and the optimization of odor, taste, and texture. And when we're talking about optimizing odor and texture, this takes us from food to cosmetic products. And this is the field I'm involved in. I'm in the area of product performance, which also includes market acceptance and consumer behavior. When it comes to cosmetic products, we've started our activities in the last 2 or 3 years, and we're very successful in what we do. And I would like to tell you more about that. Let me tell you a little more about our field of business, product performance. My colleagues in product performance optimize the odor and aroma of foods, cosmetic products, and packaging. And I'm involved in the multisensorial evaluation of foods, cosmetics, packaging concepts, and labels. And I'm going to talk about labels a little more later during my presentation. In addition, we quantify and identify volatile organic compounds and apply various sensory systems. We develop them, we validate them, and we also offer consulting and trainings. But my focus today is going to be the multisensory evaluation. My group is called Applied Multisensory Systems, and our mission is to create a holistic understanding of how a consumer perceives sensations, how they evaluate sensations, and how they respond to that. And in order to do that, we use innovative and effective research institutes. We often go back to baseline research. So that basically ties in very nicely with my work at Erlangen University, but we translate it into better products, better packagings, and for communicating with the consumers. So we support companies at various stages of product development, be it exploration or validation at a later stage, and both in product development and in marketing, we can be supportive. Looking at consumers, what happens is that we often only focus on the tip of the iceberg and just look for cognitive responses like direct questioning, interviews, questionnaires, etc. But 80% of all things happen at a subconscious level. So the subconscious, non-cognitive responses are way more important. And this is what we see as our mission. We want to create a better understanding of the consumer by digging deeper. So the question is, how do human beings perceive their world, the world they live in? How do they respond to sensations? How do they behave in their natural environment? These are the various steps we go through. First of all, we get a first impression. Next, we determine their importance and their value. Next, we consider and analyze. Maybe we also bring in other products, and we'll think about, do we like it better or less? And last, we will talk about it and make a decision and act. I decide to purchase or I decide to repurchase. And we have the subconscious versus the conscious level. So a lot of these processes happen before I even start talking about it and acting accordingly. I said multisensory, which means various sensations created by a cream, a shower gel, for example. And One focus I would like to talk about is olfaction, the sense of smell. So you see brain anatomy here. Don't worry about that. That's the only picture I'm going to show during this presentation. But I think it's very important for you to see that because a lot of insights can be derived from that, because olfaction, as opposed to the other senses, is crucial because a lot of these processes take place in the subconscious. So we find non-conscious processing, and brain anatomy explains that very nicely. So you have the sensations, and it pass directly into the brain without taking a detour via the brainstem and the thalamus, without us even being aware of it. So they are directly passed on to the brain, and the areas in the brain that are responsible for memory and associations. So what do I associate with a sensation, an odor, a smell? So subconsciously, without people realizing, I can create stable memories, and I can also trigger memories and trigger emotions, which means when you're walking through the city center, for example, you don't even notice that you smelled a perfume that you are familiar with, but you feel the emotional side of it, and you are actually put in a certain emotional state. So this is why olfaction is so special for me, and this is why I picked it as an area of research. Smells and emotions are really similar, and I explained a second ago why, because both smells and emotions are processed in a very similar way. Pleasantness is the first dimension, something that is pleasant, that plays a great role both with emotions and smells. You enter into a room saying, oh, it's a great smell, oh, wow, that reeks, you know? This is what we talk about when we say pleasantness. And we can detect both smells and emotions very well. We will notice immediately if something smells or is fragrant, but it's very hard for you to put a name to it. So if you're a perfume expert, of course you will be able to do that, but they have spent years training to be able to do that. But as a lay person, for us it's very hard to put a name to a certain smell. And both emotions and smells are something that is stored in our memory, and memory capacity for that is very high. So this is why I would say we can translate that into saying that sensations are sensory emotions. And I would like to tell you more about a study, and this is why I brought you this photo here. And I don't put any labels to the products here, but what we know is at the very moment where you want to put a certain claim to a product, like reviving, stress reducing, helps to focus, soothing, the cosmetics regulation requires us to provide proof for that. And we looked into that. We said, okay, how can we prove that this has an effect on human beings and it triggers emotions with human beings? And this is what we started looking into. So let me tell you how we did that. So what we do psychophysiological measurements after sensory stimulation. It's standardized, it's reproducible, it's placebo-controlled, which is absolutely important, and which is something that not all the studies do. And of course, we also run pseudo-randomized tests, and I'm going to explain that in a minute, how that works. So our goal is generating a digital standard in order to be able to objectively quantify the effectiveness of an aroma, but as a first step to explain why something has a soothing or a rising effect in order to help support product development and marketing claims. When looking at emotions, we will notice that depicting emotion is easy by using a two-dimensional axis. We have an axis called valence, which I like to call pleasantness, from negative to positive, and the second axis would be activation, from calm to totally excited. And you can see all the different interpretations and variations that you may see. The first study I would like to introduce to you is where we wanted to find out more about soothingness. So we took that part here, stress to relaxed, from stressed and nervous all the way to calm and relaxed. And how do we go about that? Let me show you that on the next couple of slides. My colleague, Ms. Springer, here in the front row, published that, and I worked on that too. So if you want to learn more about it, you can turn to the study to read that. And we took several steps. The paradigm, we call it a paradigm. The testing scheme is a scheme that we ourselves developed for the purpose of the study. And what we did was we asked people out on the street, like naive respondents. And you can very well imagine that their stress levels are totally different. Maybe some come here in the mornings, others came to us at night after work and experienced higher stress levels as a result. So what we did was we induced stress ourselves. And the spider represents a set of emotional images that help us produce negative arousal among the respondents. So we spent 2.5 minutes stressing our respondents, but it's ethically valid. We use the ethics committee at the Erlangen University. We're officially allowed to induce stress among our respondents. And after that, we'll use a mobile device, which looks like a hairband basically, to run an EEG. And we'll take saliva samples of our respondents, and we'll also have them fill in mood questionnaires. Mood questionnaires are like typical emotion questionnaires. Next, what we did is we applied a cream on the face. You can see that up here on the photo, facial cream. One had an ingredient, the other one was a placebo cream. So every respondent came to us to the institute twice. Once they got the active ingredient, the next time they got the placebo, and we ran the same measurement again. We did an EEG and took a saliva sample and had them complete the mood questionnaire. So what does the setup look like? So let me show you a brief snapshot from our laboratories. So this is one of our respondents with a mobile EEG on her hat, and she also wears pulse and skin conductivity measurement devices. And up here on the screen, you can see her physiological reactions. And this is the so-called olfactometer that allows us to actually pass on odors to the respondent via a tubing system. So one thing we might have to think about, is this a room fragrance, or do we have to apply it directly into the skin of the respondent? And we have various different options to do that. Next, let me explain our research methods. What you can see here is the PANAS questionnaire of our study. PANAS means positive and negative effect scales, and you see 10 positive terms and 10 negative terms, and you have a 5-point scale where the respondents can rate the terms. We always did that right after stress induction and after product application. So the respondents had to fill in that questionnaire. Actually, we used a little cotton swab here. We collected saliva, and we use a laboratory at FAU Erlangen to measure cortisol and alpha amylase in the saliva. These two are typical stress parameters that are actually present in saliva in higher levels when we're stressed out. So this allows us to look ahead. This is exactly what I meant when I said we're digging deeper. We don't just have the questionnaire, but we also have the EEG to get more information on activity in the brain, and we have the stress parameter from the hormones present in the saliva. Let me tell you more about the results. What you see here is the positive and negative terms that we used within the PANAS questionnaire. Gray means placebo and green means the active ingredient. And as you can see here, each respondent got both of the substances, and you can see it rises a little, which means that the respondents are more positive when they smell the active ingredient. And with the negative terms, it goes down. In both cases, we don't see a difference. But we saw a significant difference in the saliva stress indicators. Both cortisol and alpha amylase goes down when the active ingredient was present, which means that depending on which smell I get, I will present fewer stress indicators in my saliva in healthy respondents, obviously. Okay, let's have a look at the EEG. Why did we actually do that? What we were trying to do is trying to find a mobile, non-invasive method which will be time and cost affordable and still allow us to look into our respondents' brains. And I'm a neuroscientist, so I'm always interested in learning more about the activation in our respondents' brains. And the mobile EEG allowed us to detect certain frequencies of the signal. And we were especially interested in the alpha rhythm right here, which is present when we're in a state of relaxation, both physically and mentally. So when we're in physical and mental relaxation, we will see this particular rhythm in our brain more often. The brain waves will actually adapt to that rhythm. This is what it looks like. You could see that previously on the other picture. This is the device we started with. It's a fairly simple device compared to what we do in basic research, but in this applied science scenario, this is a fairly simple method of detecting these signals in human beings. Let us have a closer look at the mobile EEG device. As you can see, we only have very few electrodes, only 4 in total. So you just stick it behind your ears, and the signal that you get here looks like this. Of course, it requires further processing, and we use Fourier transformation in order to depict the various frequency bands. And we focused, as I said earlier, on alpha, 8 to 12 hertz. So this is the result of the analysis we ran. Let me briefly explain that to you. Have a look at the red lines here. And please remember, just give me a second. Please think back to this slide here. So the dark red line is stress induction. Then they had a 5-minute EEG window. Next, we had the application of the fragrance, and then again followed by a 5-minute EEG window. And this is the data that fits that time frame. So stress induction, gray is placebo, green is the active ingredient. The alpha activity decreases. And after the application of the product, what we see is that the active ingredient, alpha, and alpha is our benchmark for relaxation, is better than placebo. And this is actually what we were suspecting, that the substance has a soothing effect. The difference is there's a significant difference in the downward trend. It's not totally significant, but we can safely assume that this effect is actually present, which means that the cream we looked at means that the scented substance, compared to placebo, has a stress-reducing effect. We have significantly fewer negative emotions, we have significantly lower cortisol levels, and there's a statistical trend to higher alpha activity, what you could see over here. As a result, we found a suitable method to evaluate psychophysiological effects of cosmetic products on human beings. Let us take that one step further. And again, think about this two-dimensional scheme. So this is the axis we were talking about. We proved stress reduction using scientific tools. For us, what was also interesting to look at was this axis here. Like, how can I get from a bored state or a lack of energy is present towards being active and enthusiastic and full of energy. That was the next task we had. How can we try to do that? I told you that when the people come, the respondents come in, they present different levels of stress, and we induce stress to have them all at the same stress level that we're then trying to decrease. So this was the next study design. It looks a little different, a little fancier than what we saw earlier, but actually it's the same. We have the spider here again. In that study, we did both things. We looked at stress reduction, and at the same time, we looked at reduction of boredom. First of all, we got people bored, which was so interesting. It was so interesting to find out how I can find a scientifically correct method to get people bored, and I'm going to tell you about that in a second. And what we did was, how can we use an odor to get people on board, basically. What you see up here is stress induction. Now, I gave you a couple more pictures. I didn't pick the worst, but we wanted people to experience negative stress, and you can imagine maybe how the worst pictures might have looked. But this is how we went about stress induction. And when it comes to the induction of boredom, we said, okay, please look at these circles and wait until the pointer has gone round once. And only then would it go on to the next circle. It was totally boring, and we actually proved that they were bored. And this actually helped us get people out of the state of boredom by using a scent. What I'm trying to show here is the research was based on questions that we were approached with by our clients from the industry. And what we're trying to do is use tools that are the current state of the art. At the beginning, I showed you the first EEG device that we started with. Next, we had another version because the manufacturer noticed that it was a little shaky, having this hairband, and you know, that sometimes we had a problem picking up the signal correctly. So they actually transformed sensors. It was like a sports headband now, and the sensors were integrated into that, so we tried that. Right now what we're using is, we started out with 4 active electrodes, now we have 5 with that system here, and that's what's in the pipeline, what we're going to see in the future. We're currently testing it, and we're going to be using it in future studies. We're going to use an 11-panel EEG, which is like a smartwatch, but it's not a watch. It's like it will be able to measure skin conductivity simply by putting that band around my arm. And this is highly attractive for our research. We're running early tests of how well this is going to work, because we want to find a solution where we don't have to wire our respondents. Like, we don't want this lab situations, because you could see all the cables and wires on the respondents. And I just wanted to give that as an example of how we continuously try to evolve our methods in order to extract even better data. So let's look at the 2 different paradigms. Stress, we established that before, it works. We got great data out of that. But the question was, does that work for boredom too? I can say yes. We ran a first study, so we had a state of stress. In orange would be the active ingredient. So the stress increases during stress induction, and during boredom rises, again depicted here in blue. Orange is stress, blue is boredom. This means that we have succeeded in inducing boredom. And let me just give you a brief insight into that. This was just a preliminary study. And let us look at the PANAS items again. Put gray lines in between. So just look at the blue bars here. What we can see is that positivity falls as a result of the induction of boredom, and when we apply the odor, it will rise back again. And the same is true for here. When we induce stress, positivity will fall, and then we bring it back up when we get people out of the stressful situation when we apply the odor. In that case, we used the fragrance of a shower gel. So what we can say is we successfully induced stress, and we successfully reduced stress by adding a fragrance, and we successfully induced boredom and actually prove the activating effect of a fragrance here. But your question might be, these 2 dimensions of this wheel of emotion, there should be way more, shouldn't there? And this is a look ahead. Of course, there's way more than that, way more. So we have a nice and colorful diagram here. Let me just give you a very brief insight into the dimensions that we can assume are present and that we might be able to use in actual product claims. There are so many options, and we would like to focus on the top part, which is the positive feelings, and not so much the bottom part, which is the negative feelings. Or we would rather want to use the products in order to get people from the bottom emotions to the top emotions. And if someone is interested in a very special attribute here, we might focus on that and might develop a test specifically for that. And this is way more than just coming up with a questionnaire, because what we're doing is the induction of emotion, the induction of a certain behavior. And we use psychological and neuroscience tools to achieve that. Let's take a step back. The group at Fraunhofer Institute applied multisensory systems has a value offer. What we do is offer holistic product optimization by modern multisensory stimulation, which means I told you a lot about odors, and what we're trying to do is use tactile sensations, feeling on skin. How does something feel on the skin? And what does the fragrance do in combination with how something feels on your skin? We determine the impact of the multisensory product and raw material properties on consumers, both at a conscious and at a subconscious level. And we also develop measurement tools and algorithms in order to test those physiological parameters. I explained how we can go about that. To some extent, we have a mix of behavior on the one hand, sensory characterization, evaluation, hedonic evaluation, response times, but also physiology and psychology. I showed you the EEG, the olfactometer stimulation, and physiological parameters. Eye trackers is another option to capture the attention of how people look at a screen, and analyzing facial expression is another option to see how the respondent will react.
Das Ganze, wie gesagt, am Fraunhofer Institut, vielleicht noch kurz als Überblick. Wir interagieren oder wir agieren mit verschiedensten universitären Partnern hier. Das ist unser Netzwerk. Also wir als Institut in Freising mit dem ausgestreckten Arm nach Erlangen an die Universität, wo auch meine Professur angesiedelt ist. Und damit würde ich gern für heute schließen. Danke Ihnen für die Aufmerksamkeit. Würde mich freuen über Fragen oder Kommentare.
I have listened to your exciting presentation. Thank you so much for that. But I didn't quite understand your placebo experiment. That's probably because I was late. The placebo experiment was you used an odor and you used a placebo, no odor. So the respondents were applied both, with odor and without. So there are two things, with and without an active ingredient that you can smell. This means that this substance used can trigger certain effects. So you picked an odor where you expected that this would have a stress-reducing effect. But the other thing is not a placebo, because it's not that there's no fragrance at all, right? That will be my first comment. The second comment I would like to make is sensory evaluations, like the pressure you use to apply something, or the way you apply something. If you like the person that applies the cream, for example, you feel relaxed and you feel happy in that situation, while another person could cause totally different emotions. You're stressed, you don't want it to do that. Okay, I'm going to start with your second comment, and maybe you have to remind me of what your first question was. So, the second comment you made, this is why we need to have a placebo-controlled trial, because otherwise we could never find out about the effects. In that case, people, as you can see up here on the photo, the people applied it themselves. So they put it on their hands and on their cheeks, and they could smell it on their hands and on the cheeks. And if I don't run a placebo-controlled trial, I'll always have a combination of the tactile sensation and the odor. If I use a placebo-controlled trial, I can actually count the tactile out, because the same happens for the placebo, and that's what makes it so crucial. And what you mentioned here, that was very great. They had a cover, like a mask on top. It smelled like vanilla. Both smelled like vanilla, but one of them also had the active ingredient. So it was not odorless. It smelled slightly like vanilla, but the other one also smelled like the active ingredient. So this is a full placebo-controlled trial. Both respondents came in twice and do the exact same thing, but one time the active ingredient was included and the other time wasn't. And this is a standard of research. I think that was a response to both your questions, right? Any other questions? Was there a question over here? No? Oh, sorry about that. So, what about the active ingredients? Is that true for every person? Everyone who smelled that has a positive emotion about it? Because odors are pretty versatile in that regard, because for some people what's positive for one is negative for another person, right? Yes, that's definitely true. Odors are always a very subjective thing. And what I said at the very beginning, it's like everyone has a different background, learn different things. And this is something that we bring into these scenarios. And depending on how I grew up, I learned whether it's something positive or something negative for me. So what we do, and it's great the way it is, but still, naturally, there's always room for improvement. We will always have to evolve our methods. So if we have a sample size of 30 respondents, we will have an average value. And what we see in all those diagrams, it's an average value. You always have people that find it especially positive and those that find it especially negative. But if I form an average, I will be able to see statistically significant effects and can run a good comparison between placebo and the active ingredient. So we have individual differences, and of course we're making a generalized statement here, but I think we have a long, long way to go before we can actually offer really individualized products. Some companies are looking into that, saying, okay, they're offering, for example, room fragrances that were mixed especially for individuals, but researchers have not yet reached that point where we can individualize the odor experience. For example, spices trigger totally different emotions. For example, if you have gingerbread spices, for example, some people will immediately think of cookies, crisps, Christmas, holiday season. And others will think of their dentist because it's part of a local anesthetic and people will immediately have a different emotion. So normally what we need to do is group them and study only the very positive and only the very negative feedbacks. So when it comes to olfaction, there's still so much to do and explore. So this here is a form of manipulation of consumers, right? Something that consumers actually want. That's the same is true for patients, obviously, but what is it like? What about the overall spectrum? What does the industry say? What do the clients tell you? What do they want? Do they want to be optimistic? Do they want to get soothed? Which direction are we headed into here? And which substances are we talking about? What trends do we see? Okay, what do the consumers say? The market research, this is something you should rather ask the companies about. I think we see a clear trend towards additional benefits in cosmetic products. That the shower gel says this is a morning shower gel. And you also have an evening shower gel. One is reviving, the other one is relaxing and soothing. Maybe also supplements for the bathtub, etc. So people wish for additional benefits. And I think we can safely say that this exists because we've seen more and more products in that regard. Soothing and reviving. The two axes that we had here. We have a lot of products out in the market. And what consumers think about that, these are market research questions, and I can't really comment on that. But what we've been experiencing is that companies want to see further differentiation. Like, they want to move towards this very colorful wheel of emotion that I showed you during the presentation and to test various different emotions. And what's the second part of your question? What's typical? Something that's typically soothing is lavender, and something reviving and activating is lemon. So these are two very well-known examples whose effect is actually very proven, but there's way, way more. Pheromones, sure. This is a research field at universities, but this is not something that we would do at Fraunhofer, but yes. But these are still very early days with human beings and also the mechanisms, the passive actions, we have not yet identified that. One question. You told me that you're also in the field of sensory research and sensors, which means that you're saying there are sensors that can just tell us whether it's bright or dark, or whether they can actually smell lemon or lavender. Well, we're working on that. Sensory research is something more like a panel, a trained panel, experts that are, for example, in smell tests for food or cosmetic products and produce those spider webs as we all know it. But what we're currently working on is developing sensors that actually have a sense of smell, that can smell and as a result identify various different substances. But I would like to take a step back. It's nothing to do with the electronic nose because we've not yet reached that stage yet, because it always needs a brain on top of that nose. But what we're doing is we're combining different sensors and finding a way of generating electronic smell data. That's very interesting. Thank you so much. We, not me personally, but my colleague and his work group, obviously. But our department. So if you're interested in more, then just reach out. Great. Thank you very much for all your questions, for the great discussion. So if you have further questions, I'll be happy to invite you for a one-on-one talk, and thank you so much for your attention.